Hi, I am Manuel Luna and this is a presentation for the subject of Literature 2. Chapter 1. Postcolonialism. What is it? Postcolonialism is a theoretical and critical framework that analyzes, deconstructs, and challenges the cultural, political, and ideological legacies of colonialism and imperialism. It examines how colonial histories continue to influence contemporary social, cultural, and political relationships, emphasizing the importance of marginalized voices and resisting the dominance of Western narratives. Postcolonialism also explores issues of identity, representation, power, and often drawing on interdisciplinary approaches such as discourse analysis, deconstruction, and cultural studies to interrogate the continuing effects of colonial domination. Who are the main representatives of this movement? One of them is Gayatri Spivak, who is a leading postcolonial theorist whose work blends deconstruction, Marxism, and feminism. Known for her essay Can the Subaltern Speak? And her translation of Derrida's Of Grammatology, she explored how knowledge, power, and culture are shaped, particularly in colonial and postcolonial contexts. Spivak highlights the political stakes of representing the other and stresses the role of positionality in critique. Often considered an anomaly, she resists easy classification within feminist, postcolonial, and deconstructive frameworks. Secondly, we have Edward Said, who was a distinguished scholar, literary critic, and intellectual renowned for his work on postcolonial theory and his critique of Western representation of the non-Western world. He is best known for his seminal book, Orientalism, in which he analyzes how Western scholarship and cultural representation have historically constructed the Orient as exotic, backwards, and inferior, thereby justifying colonialism and imperial dominance. Lastly, we have Homi Bhabha, who is a key postcolonial theorist known for his concepts of hybridity and the third space, which examine how colonial power creates both authority and resistance. He focuses on the in-between spaces that disrupt fixed identities and cultural boundaries. Drawing from Batkin, Bhabha's idea of hybridity shows how mimicry and cultural difference can undermine colonial narratives. His third space offers a side of transformative discourse beyond dominant binaries. So, how do we apply these theories in the field of literature? Applying postcolonial theory in literature involves analyzing text to uncover how colonial power structures, identity, and cultural representations are constructed and challenged. Critics examine how colonial discourse shapes narratives, characters, and themes, often exposing underlying power relations and stereotypes. For example, scholars read texts for signs of colonial ideologies or resistant voices, as in engaged emphasis on the literaliness of Black texts and their dialogic relationships with mainstream literature. Chapter 2. Structuralism. What is structuralism? Structuralism emerges in 1950s France, and it argues that meaning arises from relationships within larger systems, not from individual elements alone. In language and culture, it views signs like words and myths as arbitrary, gaining meaning only through their position in a structure. Structuralist analysis focuses on uncovering patterns, oppositions, and systems that shape meaning across cultural contexts. One of the main structuralist representatives was Claude Lévi-Strauss, a key structuralist anthropologist who applied structuralism to myths and culture, viewing myths not as isolated stories, but as parts of a broader system. He identified binary positions like nature, culture, or human-animal as central to mythic structures, arguing that these patterns reveal universal aspects of human thought. Another of the main structuralist representative, Roland Barthes, was a French theorist and semiotician who used structuralist methods to analyze literature and culture. He examined how signs create meaning in text, helping develop semiotics as a critical tool. In works like Mythologies and As Set, he identified narrative codes, such as proairetic and hermeneutic, and brought texts into lexis to reveal the cultural and symbolic structures behind meaning. So how do we apply this to literature? Applying structuralist theory to literature involves analyzing text through the underlying structures like genre conventions, narrative patterns, and systems of signs. Structuralists focus on recurring motifs and contrasts, interpreting stories as part of a broader template rather than for their moral or thematic content. They connect narratives to universal cycles or intertextual systems, highlighting patterns over individual meaning. Structuralists also view narrative elements as signs within a network of meaning, breaking them down into basic units like mythemes to reveal cultural or mythic structures. This approach emphasizes form and system, aiming to uncover the deeper patterns that shape storytelling across texts and traditions. Chapter 3: Narratology. What is narratology? Narratology is the study of how narratives are constructed and how they create meaning. It explores the form, organization, and techniques of storytelling, focusing on the underlying systems that shape all narratives rather than specific stories. By examining elements like plot, perspective, and structure, narratology helps uncover how stories function and why they resonate culturally and aesthetically. One of the main representatives of this movement is Gerard Genette, who was a major figure in narratology, known for analyzing how stories are told rather than what they tell. In his influential book, Narrative Discourse, he introduced key concepts such as mimetic versus diegetic and explored narrative structures through categories like order, duration, and voice. Genette's detailed framework has become foundational in the study of narrative, offering scholars precise tools to examine how narratives are constructed and experienced across literature and media. On the other hand, Vladimir Prop was a Russian formalist and folklorist, best known for the morphology of the folktale, where he identified 31 recurring narrative functions in Russian fairy tales. He showed that stories follow specific sequences of events based on characters, roles, and actions, focusing on structure over context. His work laid the groundwork for structuralist narratology and influenced later narrative theory. So how do we apply this to literature? Applying narratology in literature involves analyzing key elements like plot, structure, narrative perspective, temporal order, and modes of narration to understand how stories are constructed and generate meaning. For example, in Poe's The Oval Portrait, narratology helps reveal how the use of the framing devices and reverse chronology contribute to the story's themes and mood. It also focuses on focalization and narrative voices, showing how perspective influences reader interpretation. These tools allow critics to see how narrative form enhances content, uncovers deeper themes, and creates emotional effects. Additionally, narratology supports comparative studies across different genres and media, such as film or advertising, by identifying universal narrative patterns and unique stylistic features, enriching our broader understanding of storytelling. And having said that, I can conclude the video. Thanks for watching and have a good day.